Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your friend Mike Brady from Liner Designs and Illustration. Now, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound quite right, does it? See, back in 2018, well before I was making YouTube videos, I started an illustration business called Liner Designs and Illustration. But over the years, I noticed that people who I gave my business card to would simply smile and ask about linear designs. Why did you start linear designs? And that kind of thing. And I realized they were adding an imaginary A to the word liner, because liner didn't mean anything to anybody anymore as a word by itself. And then eventually I changed the name to Ocean Liner Designs, and the rest is history. Once upon a time, the ocean liner was a mainstay of popular culture. It was most people's dream to get to travel on one. Their names like Olympic, Aquitania, Queen Elizabeth, Comte de Savoie, Queen Mary, they were like celebrities. They were all household names. The world's just changed a lot now, and if you were to ask anybody on the street what an ocean liner actually is, they'd probably just give you a blank stare. In fact, newspapers and media get it wrong all the time. I've seen cruise ships called liners regularly, but it's just not true. The ocean liner was a very different beast, far removed from the boxy, floating apartment blocks that you see nowadays. So today, let's answer the question once and for all. What is an ocean liner? What is an ocean liner? Well, I get asked this question a lot, and I have a really simple explanation for you. A cruise ship is like a party limousine, but an ocean liner is like a bus. Let me explain. We've talked a lot on this channel about the history of passenger ships, but here's a small recap. Way back, if you wanted to go anywhere far away, like a new continent, for example, you'd have to go by ship. Of course, back then, in the 17 and 1800s, they were small wooden sailing ships. The conditions were absolutely horrendously awful. Imagine months on end with nothing to do, sharing close, cramped quarters with hundreds of other people, terrible food, constant damp. On one particularly bad migrant voyage out to Australia, 50 passengers died, and all of them were children. It was that bad. Because sailing ships were blown along by the wind, they relied on a steady breeze to make the trip, but it made them slow. The migrant sailing ship Marco Polo became an absolute sensation when it cracked the speed record for making a round trip out to Australia from Britain. The ship became renowned for its sheer demon speed, but that record was just shy of 6 months. 6 months to sail from Britain to Australia and back. It's shocking, right? Not only that, but the crossing times were unreliable because the ships relied on good weather to keep up a good turn of speed. If a storm blew in, the captain would be forced to haul down almost all his sails and then battle slowly ahead for days, and sometimes weeks. Many sailing ships simply never reached their destination. Dozens and dozens disappeared in storms, or hit icebergs, or were simply never seen again for unknown reasons. Now, after all this, you're probably wondering why anybody would have wanted to have gone to sea back then. I know I wouldn't have. But imagine how difficult it would have been to even run a shipping company with no availability to set a regular service. Ships were often days or weeks late getting into port. It meant that ships would sail when and if they could. But then 2 big things happened that changed everything. First, shipbuilders began to make their ships out of metal, iron to begin with, and then steel. It meant that ships could be built to be stronger, more safe, and simply bigger. The bigger the ship, the less it is at the ocean's mercy. But then shipbuilders began to fit steam engines to their vessels. The steam engine had been used for industrial purposes for a while, but when it was married to a metal-hulled ship, it created a new breed of vessel. In 1845, the SS Great Britain was introduced. That was one of the first ships to combine all this new technology together. She could sail to Australia and back in just 2 months, compared to the Marco Polo's 6. She was bigger, faster, and most importantly, she didn't need to rely on the wind to get around. Now, at last, there was a ship that could maintain a regular scheduled service to a destination from the same home port. It would maintain a regular line back and forth. It was a liner, an ocean liner. So what followed was a technological arms race as different companies realized how beneficial this new kind of ship was, and the massive profit that could be had by running a regular service from the same port. It guided the way that ocean liners were built, and even how many of them. Pretty soon, companies realized that just one ocean liner running a regular service was a waste. You could have 2 or 3 identical sister ships running back and forth. If it took 10 days to cross the Atlantic, then a businessman knew that they could get to Britain from America every 10 days on the same day every week. It was that simple. But then companies started to try outdoing one another in terms of speed because passengers wanted to get across the ocean as quickly as possible. The 2-month voyage across the Atlantic got whittled down to about 6 days, and then the other month-long voyage out to Australia dropped to as low as 25 days or so. The ocean liner got bigger, faster, and better. Some were lost, but there weren't anywhere near as many horrific disasters at sea as during the days of sail. So why do we have liners today? Well, we do. Just not in the seas, up in the skies. The airliner, and you can see why they called them that, they do exactly the same thing the ocean liners did, although arguably without any of the panache and style. Regular, scheduled international travel. When the jet airliner was introduced in the 1950s and 60s, it was all over for big passenger-carrying ships, and the ocean liner fell out of use. Today, there are still, of course, big passenger ships out on the oceans. Cruise ships. These vessels are designed for pleasure cruises, sometimes to nowhere in particular, but often with set destinations in mind. Their whole reason for being is fun. They're designed to be fun to be on as a passenger, and they're designed to take you to interesting places. But here's why they aren't ocean liners. They aren't taking you to a destination as a matter of purpose on a regular scheduled service. See, ocean liners had to be designed to battle the worst of the ocean's temper. If a storm blew in, the ship would have to go straight through it with as little delay as possible. Remember, speed was everything. But a cruise ship? Well, if bad weather blows in, most will try to skirt around it or change their itinerary. Cruise ships can still handle bad weather, but they're not designed to be driven through the worst of oceanic storms at top speed. It's reflected in their construction. They have low freeboard, that's the amount of ship's hull above the waterline. Their superstructures, the upper part of the ship, are covered in glass balconies which are fragile and susceptible to damage from big waves. On top of this, their internal layout is very different to that of an ocean liner. Cruise ships are designed for passengers' comfort and convenience. And because the ships aren't going to be battling their way through rough weather, restaurants and dining rooms can be kept out of the way toward the back of the ship. Their hulls are shaped differently as well. Instead of slicing through waves in a bid for speed, they're designed to comfortably ride over them, and to make sure that the cruise ships can enter a wide variety of shallow foreign ports, they have relatively little drafts, that is, the amount of ship below the waterline. Now compare all this with the only ocean liner still in service today, Queen Mary 2. The ship was designed and built in the early 2000s for Cunard Line as a modern-day ocean liner in the traditions of old, but to use the best of 21st century technology and design. She was designed by renowned naval architect Stephen Payne, who had a few interesting design hurdles to overcome. The result is a very unique ship, absolutely one of a kind in the world. In contrast with pure cruise ships, Queen Mary 2 has a very large freeboard. She has a big, tall hull designed to keep passenger cabins and balconies well away from the waves. The ship has a large breakwater at the bow, designed to cleave waves in half and divert the white water away from the ship. And instead of just riding over big waves, Queen Mary 2 will slice straight through them, because remember, the ship, as an ocean liner, is really designed to maintain that regular service between Southampton and New York. Inside, the layout is somewhat labyrinthine because it hasn't been designed with just passenger convenience in mind. The ship is an ocean liner, and she'll be going through bad weather regularly. Passenger dining spaces are situated more towards the center of the ship, where the rocking and the rolling in a storm is less likely to be felt. Like all ocean liners, Queen Mary 2 also has a fairly deep draft for additional stability. About 33 feet, or just over 10 meters of the ship sits below the waterline. But by contrast, the Oasis-class cruise ships, a full 78,000 gross tons larger, have 3 feet less draft. Queen Mary can thunder along at 33 knots, but the Oasis-class lumber at about 22. So now you know the major differences between cruise ships and ocean liners, but here's a funny twist for you, because cruise ships can't really serve as ocean liners, but sometimes ocean liners can serve as cruise ships, and Queen Mary 2 is a really good example of this because she's specifically been built to serve both purposes. See, back in the late 1800s and the early 20th century, as ships became more luxurious and comfortable, people just wanted to spend more time on board. German companies began offering cruises on their liners, not to get people urgently to a destination, but to lazily sail around as passengers enjoyed their time on board. British companies soon took this concept and ran even further with it. Cunard Line's ocean liner Laconia was offering regular cruises in the 1920s during winter time when she wasn't serving as a liner on the service to Boston from Liverpool. It's a bit like using a luxurious bus instead of a party limousine. It can be done and you'll be perfectly comfortable. But sometimes ocean liners couldn't just be slapped with a new paint scheme and called a cruise ship. It took a little bit more than that. Often the very way they are designed and laid out on the inside can impact whether or not people actually enjoy their time. For example, take Italy's grandiose ocean liners of the 1950s. They had relatively short careers because the jet airplane put them out of business. Italian lines were hoping they could be used as cruise ships instead, but here they ran into a series of problems. Probably the most serious was the fact that these ships were designed and fitted out for speed, so they had some of the most powerful engines you could fit to a ship at the time. But that's essentially useless for a cruise ship, which is not meant to be going anywhere fast, and those engines burned tons and tons of fuel, making them incredibly expensive to run. But not only that, as an ocean liner, the ships were segregated by class, so converting them to a one-class cruise ship resulted in a frustrating experience for passengers. Staircases skipped entire decks, and some corridors or passages went nowhere, because in their past lives they would have served to separate the classes. These ships didn't work as cruisers, and they were soon scrapped. But by contrast, some ocean liners were designed with conversions to one-class trips in mind, so they worked extremely well as cruise ships in their later lives. One weird standout to this rule is the SS France. She was designed as France's answer to the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth in the 1950s, and she was a stunning, monstrously large ship, but of course, she was introduced quite late at the time the jet airliner was taking off, pun intended. So France was sold to Norwegian Cruise Lines, who went to town on the interior, turning this enormous, purpose-built transatlantic liner into a luxury cruise ship in about 8 months. Now really, the venture shouldn't have worked. France had been built as an ocean liner. Her inside layout was somewhat confusing, she had a huge draft, so she wouldn't be going any exotic, shallow ports, and her hull was long and narrow. Cabins came in weird varieties of shapes and sizes, and her engines were hugely powerful and expensive to run. NCL overcame that last one by simply removing 2 of the ship's 4 propellers and engines, dropping her speed from 35 knots to a leisurely 20 or so. Now somehow, the whole thing just worked. Passengers loved it. France was renamed Norway, and went on to have an insanely successful 26-year-long career as a cruise ship. By contrast, she had only served 12 years as an ocean liner. So, I feel like I got a little bit sidetracked with the story here, but in summary, what is an ocean liner? Well, it's like a luxurious, pretty bus designed to get you somewhere quick. What is a cruise ship? Well, it's like a party limousine, just being on board is meant to be the focus. Sometimes, though, an ocean liner can serve as a cruise ship with varying degrees of success, but can a cruise ship serve as an ocean liner? I don't know, I'll have to think about that one. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Ocean Liner Designs. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we get new videos out weekly. If you want to support my work and get really cool perks like behind the scenes and early access, please visit my Patreon in the link in the description below, or sign up as a YouTube member. Come and join the crew. As always, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you again next time.